Welcome everyone. My name's Liz Milne. I manage the Natural Environment and Coast team at Kent County Council, and for the past year and a half I've had the pleasure of working with the rest of the Making Space for Nature team in developing the local nature recovery strategy for Kent and Medway. So the programme for the next hour and a half is that I will first of all introduce what a local nature recovery strategy is. Now I see a few faces around the screen who have previously been at one of our workshop sessions. So some of this first part of it might be familiar, but it's really important that we all understand and coming from the same place in respect of what a local nature recovery strategy is. I'll then go into the detail of what we're actually proposing within the strategy. So giving you an overview of what it is that the strategy is proposing for nature recovery in the county. Depending on how we're doing for time, we might break for a quick 5 minutes at this point. It really depends on how many questions and answers we get through and whether we have time to allow a short break. But if it's needed and we have the time, we will do that. And then I will finish up the session by looking at how we understand the local nature recovery strategy will be used to inform nature recovery, and how you can use the online mapping platform to understand where some of those spatial elements of the strategy sit and sort of have a play with that tool online. As I said at the start, we are recording this session, so if you have your camera on, you may wish to turn it off so that your face doesn't appear. It's entirely up to you. And please, for the purposes of everyone else being able to hear the presentation clearly, could you make sure your microphones are muted during the presentation? After each of those three sections that I've just outlined, we will have a question and answer. And as I said, please use the Slido to log your questions, or feel free to raise your hand during the Q&A session and Katie will introduce you. Also, just to save you having to scribble away too much, all of the slides will be circulated after the briefing, so you can sit back and enjoy the pictures and listen to me rather than having to scribble away. So I'll now get cracking on the presentation itself, as we have quite a lot to get through this evening. So first of all, just a scene setter really for the purposes of the nature recovery strategy and the reason why we need it. I'm sure it's not passed any of you by that in 2023, the State of Nature report showed that UK species abundance has declined on average by 19% since 1970, when the record started to be taken. And alongside this, it was shown that 1 in 6 species are threatened with extinction, and 151 of the species that have been assessed since 1970 have already been lost, are already extinct. And coupled alongside that is the fact that only 1 in 7 of our important habitats for wildlife were found to be in good condition. So it's hardly surprising that we're seeing a decline in the abundance and diversity of our species when the habitats that they rely on are not in good condition either. And sadly, all of these statistics together do mean that we are currently classified as one of the world's most nature depleted country, which is obviously a very sad state for a country that seemingly really cares about the nature and wildlife that it has. And also this national picture is reflected at the local level. So the year before the State of Nature report, we published in Kent in 2022 our own State of Nature report. And this showed that for our assessed species, 10% of those were threatened with extinction. And over 30% of our sites of special scientific interest were found to not be in favourable condition. And when you consider that these sites are the areas in the county that are home to our most rare and endangered species and represent, or should represent, England's best wildlife and geological sites, that this is a really sorry state that over 30% of those are not being managed and are not being managed to retain them in favourable condition. And again, it goes back to the point that it's therefore not surprising that we have such a large proportion of our assessed species threatened with extinction. There's also the fact that there is a decline generally in the area of land under conservation management. So that would lead to our triple SIs being in unfavourable condition, but more just generally across the board mean that we are seeing the qualities of our habitats really declining. And we also have the fact that the majority of our rivers and lakes and also coastal waters are just not meeting good ecological status. So it's not just our terrestrial habitats that are threatened, but also our freshwater and marine. And the fact is we have a growing population in Kent, and we have a population that's growing above national average. And that means that concerns that result from development such as habitat fragmentation and loss, and concerns that relate to just an increase in pressure on the natural environment, such as pollution levels, these are really unlikely to change without significant intervention. And we don't just need action to address this desperate picture. I mean, personally, I think that's reason enough to take action. But there's also the fact that we rely on a number of ecosystem services that the natural world provides. And without them, we simply would not survive. So we have from ecosystem services, we have provisioning services, which give us the food and drink that we need to survive. It provides us with water and also provides us with materials for building. There's also the regulating services that a healthy natural environment provides. It gives us clean air, it stores the carbon, and it also provides pollinating services for the food we rely on. It also supports us in providing healthy soils for the food we grow and cycles our nutrients. And finally, it provides us cultural benefits. For example, physical health and mental well-being benefits. It provides opportunities for tourism and recreation. And not just in cultural, but across the board, there's also an association of economic benefits that all of this provide, because all of these services are either providing us with a commodity to sell, or they're providing us with a service, which means we don't have to artificially create that service and therefore can save on costs there. So in response to this, in 2022, the government published legally binding targets to protect our environment, clean up our air and rivers, and boost nature. And these legally binding commitments pledge to end the decline of nature and also to recover nature as well. And recognising that any recovery of nature would need targeted, coordinated and collaborative action at the local level, the Environment Act in 2021 set in place a requirement for the development of local nature recovery strategies. So a local nature recovery strategy, as I said, is a legal requirement that stems from the 2021 Environment Act. Across England, there will be 48 of these created with no gaps or overlaps. And if you think of each nature recovery strategy as like a jigsaw piece, they all slot together. And to make sure they do slot together and work at these joins, all of the strategies production or development is led by regulations and statutory guidance, and they're all supported through a DEFRA grant. They are created at a landscape strategic scale, but are locally focused. So they are locally developed by an appointed responsible authority. And in the case of Kent and Medway, that responsible authority was Kent County Council. And really importantly is all of these strategies are to be collaboratively developed. So quite often a strategic document like this would be developed by a small group of people who sort of hunker away for 12 months or so. And the first time that you see the strategy and what it's proposing is when it comes out to public consultation stage. But there was a real intent for these to be very much developed from the start with local stakeholders. Oh, excuse me. And the purpose of these local nature recovery strategies is that they will agree the local priorities and associated actions for nature recovery, and collectively will deliver a nature recovery network for England that not only ends the decline, but supports nature's recovery. Excuse me. So in Kent and Medway, we set about delivering a local nature recovery strategy that would provide a set of agreed priorities for nature recovery with associated actions that would enable those priorities to be delivered. to provide a vision that was shared for nature recovery, but also promoted the use of nature-based solutions within the county, that created a framework for joined up action. And because it was a framework that was developed with those that would be instrumental in its delivery, the strategy would not only be ambitious, but also would be realistic and deliverable. And that's made even more the case by the fact that there are a number of supporting mechanisms and finance that are linked to the local nature recovery strategy, which I'll come to later in the presentation. And finally, this wouldn't just be a strategy of words on paper, but it would also be a strategy that was spatially framed. So where we've identified the priorities and actions for nature, we would then take this and focus on where they would best be delivered to best recover nature and also halt its decline in the first place. So looking at where that action was most needed and where it would deliver the greatest benefits. I think at this point it's useful to just pause to think about what the strategy will and won't do, because it's really important to set expectations as to what it is that the strategy is trying to achieve. So the strategy will identify these areas where action is likely to provide the greatest gains, but those boundaries are not sort of especially localized, and they're not definitive boundaries. So they're very much an indication of where we anticipate action will provide what's required in terms of nature recovery. Also, where we do identify these potential measures, the strategy is not dictating those actions, nor is it instructing their implementation. It is just proposing the potential measures that could be taken to support the recovery of nature. And consequently, there's no suggestion that any of this will be forcing landowners and managers to make changes to the way they use or manage the land or undertake their operations. But because the strategy is linked to a wide range of government grants and other funding and investment approaches, it is hoped that delivery of these actions will be incentivised because there will be a financial benefit to do so. And so there won't be any additional costs falling on landowners, and may even be in their interest to deliver them. And the strategy will not offer any statutory protection for the land, nor will it prevent development from happening. But there will be a role for it to inform future local plans, and there will be a role where it informs development management, so informing planning applications in respect of biodiversity net gain. And I'll come on to how it will do that in a bit more detail at the end of the session today. And finally, it's not a case that once we publish this, hopefully in the summer this year, that the work ends. In fact, actually, that's exactly when the real work begins, because that's when we want to see delivery happening. And also, it will not sit there and be a strategy that lasts for 10, 15, 20 years. It will need to be reviewed, revised and republished, and that will be instructed by the Secretary of State on a regular cycle. And that cycle will occur every 3 to 10 years. And so effectively what we're looking to have is that in time we will have a strategy that ensures that action and investment is directed to where it's most needed and where it will deliver the benefits, but also that it will direct losses and impacts away from our most valuable assets. In delivering or developing rather the strategy, there are a number of principles that we applied to ensure that it was the most robust strategy that we could present for the county. So first of all, we made sure that any of the priorities and the potential measures always sort of bear in mind the landscape character, the catchment functions and the ecosystem links that work across the county. So making sure that the strategy not only sort of supported but enhanced the functionality of the land within the county. We wanted to ensure that it focused on addressing the most significant impacts that arise from the many pressures and challenges that face nature. So it was being realistic about what are the challenges that we really can tackle, and where it might be something that we can't change. For instance, it's not within the gift of the local nature recovery strategy to prevent or stop water pollution. That's something that sits sort of really outside of our scope, but there was opportunities for us to look at, well, how can we mitigate mitigate any impacts there may be, and how can we reduce the chance of this pollution later down the line by some of the land management mechanisms that we'd like to see happen in the county, for example. We also wanted to see that our efforts were targeted to our most significant and important habitats, and that significance and importance occurs at both a local and a national basis. So nationally, it may be because we have an exceptional stronghold, or we have a real big chunk of the nation's resource of this particular habitat. Or it could be that it's something locally that we have very little of, and it's something we want to make sure that we retain and, if possible, extend. So that meant that we would not only concentrate in habitats that were threatened in extent, but also we would concentrate on habitats that perhaps were seeing continual degradation in quality, or were at particular risk from a changing climate. And the fifth consideration was making sure that where we were looking at our habitats and what we wanted to achieve for those habitats, that we were also given real consideration to the needs of the species that depended on these habitats, and that any management interventions really considered the species requirements within the habitats they were associated with. We also wanted to make sure that anything that we were doing was working in line with the ambitions of both local and national priorities and targets. And that wasn't just for nature, but also things like how we could support the delivery of better green and blue infrastructure by ensuring that maybe where we deliver our actions for habitat creation, that if that habitat was not overly sensitive to increased recreation, that you might put it in an area where there was particularly, say, for instance, low access to green space, and it was a particular priority identified by a local plan. And also just looking at how we could promote and support a wider environmental challenges and benefits that a healthy natural environment just delivers for us. And it was also identifying the actions and the delivery mechanisms that were needed to achieve the priorities for the county's nature, but also targeting these, like I said, to where they were most needed and where they would deliver the widest benefits. And you'll hear me say that a lot over the course of the presentation. And the reason for that is that the requirement of the strategy was that we had to be very targeted. So we had to really drill down and focus where that action should be targeted. And finally, the eighth principle of the strategy development was to, wherever possible, maximise the opportunities for also delivering nature-based solutions when we were delivering nature recovery actions. So there's a wealth of opportunities that nature-based solutions offer the county in terms of tackling some of the real issues that we have, real challenges such as flood water management, general water management, water quality, air quality, all of these sorts of things that need to be tackled, and also that have different funding streams and different grant and investment streams, that if we combine a nature recovery action with also delivering a service or a benefit as well, it might open up some additional funds to nature recovery that perhaps wouldn't normally be available. So it's about making sure that we're really clever about where we're trying to deliver some of these actions, and looking at whether there's other benefits that can be delivered through them. A further and final principle of development was this participatory development. We really wanted to make sure that we took on this requirement for collaborative development from the very outset, so that all stakeholders could fully participate. And that was because by having that involvement right from the very start, we would enable the strategy to be based on the most up-to-date data and evidence, and developed with the input of experts. It would be informed by those with local knowledge and practical experience, and it would just ensure that it was an entirely transparent process. And when you consider some of the influences and opportunities that the LNRS might present, we wanted to make sure that it was very clear. And the other thing, the other benefit of having this participatory development is a sort of a held ownership of the strategy, rather than it just being something that was developed and presented by Kent County Council. And we were really blown away by the response that we got when we put out calls to stakeholders to get involved. Over the course of 20 workshops, we had well in excess of 1,000 people engaging. And this really only relates to those 20 workshops. We also attended many different meetings and other events where people allowed us to come along and talk to stakeholders. And so we think we've probably engaged at least double that amount across the course of the past 12 months since we've been developing the strategy. And that has involved participation from all sorts of sectors. So not just the usual sectors you'd expect to be involved in this, conservation, conservation and government agencies, but a real plethora of different stakeholders that all have an opportunity to either influence or help deliver nature recovery within the county. And across the different individual workshop attendees we had, they represented nearly 300 different organisations, bodies, businesses and affiliations. So we feel like we really genuinely did have a really broad spectrum of stakeholder engagement. And in addition to this, the project was also steered through a formal delivery structure, and that included a board and delivery group. We had a supporting authorities group, so that's our local planning authorities, had the opportunity to guide and steer the work to make sure that it would work with local plans. We had dedicated advisors from our government agencies, and we also had a number of technical advisory groups who steered us on the mapping work, the selection of our priority species, helped us understand the importance and the value and the opportunity that exists with land management and land use, gave us technical input on the complex nature of freshwater habitats and coastal habitats, and also provided us with advice on our communications work. And owing to this exceptional amount of input, when I use the word we in terms of the strategy, the we I'm talking about really does mean the county. This local nature recovery strategy, although Kent County Council undertook the work to develop it, it is not a KCC strategy. Effectively, we are a consultant working on behalf of DEFRA to provide this local focus for the Nature Recovery Network. So it really is a strategy that should be viewed and understood as something that's owned by the whole county and is not Kent County Council. And this is just a final shout out to everyone that has assisted us. And I know there are many people here with us this evening who have done that. And we really are indebted to the extensive contributions that partners and stakeholders have made in terms of time, expertise and support along the process. So I'll just pause there in case there are any questions on the strategy itself, in terms of what the strategy is aiming to do, or the process we undertook in respect of development. Katie, are there any hands up or questions?
We've just got one comment on the Slido. It says, I'm keen to learn more about the strategy itself rather than the reasons for its development and the process you went through. It's very thorough, though.
Excellent. Well, hopefully that process, you'll have some idea from that, the process you went through. The next part of this presentation is very much what's in the strategy. So I'm hoping we'll give that a good tick in the box there for you. If you do want to really understand how we went from A to Z in terms of the how we went from that very first stage of asking people what they considered were the real challenges facing the county's nature to the strategy we see today. That's all available on our website. There is a dedicated section to the public consultation, and in that is a page that has all supporting documents that will help you understand the process, and each of the stages of the process for development are broken down, and you can see all the workshop reports, all the decision-making process, all of that is all in those reports. There's a lot to go through, but if you were really interested in particularly delving into any aspect of the detail of the work, all of that should be there. Anything else, Katie?
No, that's all.
Lovely. Well, I shall move on then, because by the sounds of it, everyone's keen to hear what the actual content of this strategy is. So the strategy itself is presented in 2 documents plus the online mapping tool. And the first section, part 1, sets the context and provides the justification for why we have decided on these priorities and why we have proposed the actions. And this basically tells us why Kenton Medway is so important for nature, what are the pressures and challenges that we're seeing for it, and what opportunities are presented in terms of nature recovery. I've decided not to focus on this in today's overview because I'm pretty sure that everyone knows most of that, and at the very least, it's a nice read that you can do it at your own leisure. And instead, what I will do now is focus on part 2 of the strategy, which is the real nuts and bolts of the proposals for nature recovery. So the second part of the strategy presents essentially all the statutory requirements that we were told we had to include within the local nature recovery strategy. So this is the underlying principles and vision, the priorities that sit underneath this, the potential measures that will deliver the priorities, the mapping that targets where those potential measures would best be delivered. It presents the areas of particular importance for biodiversity, areas that could become of importance for biodiversity, and the local habitat map. So I will now take you through each of those elements in turn and give you a bit more detail as to what it is that we have in the strategy for this. So first of all, are our founding principles for the nature recovery strategy. So this is based on the Lawton principles and very much focuses on in the first place, improving what we already have and making sure they're in a healthy and functioning state, so better, and then increasing the size of our most valuable and important habitats by and delivering bigger. Then, in addition, establishing new and nature-rich sites. So not only providing more space, but also through these new sites, allowing us to connect up the core sites that we have in the county. And then finally, enhancing connections and really trying as best as we can to make sure, excuse me, that our landscape from a wildlife perspective is very much joined up and that species are able to easily navigate across the county. And that's particularly important because that allows our wildlife to be able to adapt and change with a change in climate and move as is required. So we decided that all of our strategies should be aimed around achieving the Lawton principles, but bolted on 2 additional principles that related to working with nature and the use of natural processes, and also focusing on the important role that our private landowners, land managers and farmers have in delivering a better and more coherent and resilient wildlife network. And that is particularly key for Kent because we do have so much land under sort of agricultural processes and in private ownership. So whatever we've done in terms of potential measures, all of our potential measures, our actions that are proposed within the strategy are designed to deliver against those 6 principles. When we started reviewing the outcomes, there were clear emerging high-level ambitions that centred around broad habitat groupings. So we use these high-level ambitions to create 10 ambitions that together give us our nature recovery vision. And under each of these sit more specific priorities, and many of those specific priorities drill down to specific habitat types. So the ambitions focus on increasing the functional connectivity of high quality habitats, increasing the use of nature-based solutions, land management and land use increasingly being used to deliver nature recovery gains, that species are at the heart of habitat management, restoration, extension and creation, that we restore, connect and extend our species-rich grassland, that we safeguard successional habitats from loss and damage, that we bring woodland trees and hedgerows under active management and increase both cover and connectivity, that we ensure our freshwater habitats are clean, sufficient, healthy, and also their associated catchments, their functions are restored, that we provide for nature in urban environments, and finally, that we secure high-functioning natural and connected coastal habitats. Now, I'll leave you to read those individual ambitions at your leisure. But the one thing you will note is there's a lot of words there, and sometimes those words are very difficult. They can be quite sort of restrictive for people to really understand what it is, inaccessible for people to understand what it is that we're trying to achieve. So the project over the summer commissioned some artwork to illustrate what these visions mean. So each bit of artwork was based on what our stakeholders had told us they wanted to see for nature recovery in the county. And arguably, these illustrate our ambitions and our vision so much better than the text can. And this artwork is joining us on what we're calling the Consultation Roadshow as we travel around the county. So if you are able to come and see us, you'll be able to have a closer look at the artwork, but you are able to also view it online if you're not able to meet us. So as I said, we have these 10 ambitions, and sitting under each of these 10 ambitions are more detailed priorities, which outline the outcome we want to see for nature in Kent and Medway. And the strategy also identifies priority species that action should be focused on. The priorities were developed with stakeholders through a series of workshops and focused on outcomes that tackled the county's most notable pressures and challenges and supported delivery of local and national ambition against our most significant, important and at-risk habitats. So our strategy has 52 priorities. So I'm afraid I won't sit through and take you through every single one individual. But here are just some examples of some of the priorities that we have identified under connectivity, under nature-based solutions, under land management, species-rich grassland and successional habitats. And then under ambitions of ancient woodland, streams and urban areas and coastal environments. Sorry, I flicked on a bit quickly there. And as I said, we also have priorities related to species. So the priority species were identified from a long list of just over 1,500 rare, threatened and significant species that Natural England sort of selection criteria informed us we have in the county. So the priority species work was informed by quite a clearly set out process by Natural England, which meant that we had to take our list of rare, threatened and significant species and really bring it down to a focused set of species. So although it wasn't quite as few as Natural England wanted us to get down to, we managed to bring that number down to 141 priority species in the county. And these 141 are representative of all taxa. So we have all taxa identified within the county. And they were selected not just on the basis of need and urgency, but also in consideration of whether action for them would support the recovery of those other sort of 1,300 or so species that have been effectively not included from that 1,500. So by addressing action within a particular habitat assemblage, it would not only tackle and help the recovery of that particular 141 species, but we would also see wider benefits for all species under that particular assemblage. And for each of those priority species as well, we have potential measures identified that support their recovery. So for each particular species, depending on what habitat we're looking at, there's recommendations for either things that need to happen to that habitat or ways in which they need to be managed. All of the protected species work, priority species work was undertaken with a technical advisory group made up of over 30 of the county's species specialists. So we were really fortunate to have so many specialists within the county, and even more fortunate that they were all willing to give their time to the project to make sure that our priority species list really was robust and really was based on the best evidence, and also was we knew it would meet the needs of our threatened species. So whilst we have that, the fact that we try to select species that would have wider benefits to the 1,300 or so species that weren't included in that shortlist, we've also made sure that there is a priority included within the strategy that ensures that all species are considered when any works for the strategy are designed. So making sure that if you're looking at particular habitat, that long list of species is consulted, and the species that are associated with the habitat you might be designing for, you will then know what is important to consider and perhaps look to sort of incorporate that into the habitat, either management, creation, restoration or extension work that's being undertaken. Then sitting under each of those 52 priorities are a number of potential measures, and these are the proposed action that have been identified will deliver the priority. And when it comes to mapping it, targeted to where it will deliver the greatest gains and benefits. So here we have an example of a potential measure, or potential measures rather, for one particular priority. So the priority that we're looking at here as an example relates to coastal and floodplain grazing marsh. And we have a priority for every priority. The potential measures listed denote which of the strategy principles they relate to. So in this case, we have a potential measure that relates to the principle of better. There is also a potential measure that relates to the principle of more. And there is also a potential measure that relates to the principle of connectivity. So you can see here how we've made sure that every single priority is addressing in one way or another the principles of better, bigger, more and connected. Not shown here, but if there is also an action that relates to either land management or nature-based solutions, those are also identified alongside the priority. What's also included in some of the priorities are supporting measures that may be needed. So these are measures which sit outside the scope of the local nature recovery strategy. So we were told that the strategy could only include measures that related to works designed to tackle habitats or species. But when we discussed with our stakeholders what was required to deliver on these priorities, a number of the measures didn't relate in that respect. And we felt it was really important to include them because it sets the context for what is needed to underpin the success of these measures and what's needed to underpin the achievement of the priority. So that might be things like better educating people, getting people better engaged, supporting landowners or land managers or contractors, etc., to understand the particular importance or nuances of management and that sort of thing. So you can see why that's not something that's considered a potential measure for the strategy, but it's really important that we still make reference to it, because without all of that underpinning the work that we're trying to achieve through this, it will be unlikely that we will achieve the priorities set out. And similarly, we also found that while we were trying to map our potential measures, but also when we were just trying to understand what the priority really was and what was really needed, there were some areas of evidence and data and information that just was lacking. And so we've likewise have identified what further information is needed, which we have on the example given here. And finally, we also have all of our priority species that are associated with this particular habitat assemblage. So in the measures table, like we have here, you will see that there are some measures that have numbers. If there is a number like this, you've got GL 2.1, 2.2, 2.3. If there is a reference number for a potential measure, this was a potential measure that we were able to map. So that meant we were able to target the delivery of that measure, that action, to where we thought it would serve the best purpose. And so if you want to view those maps, you take that reference number and you open up up the relevant map on the online mapping tool, and I'll show you how that works shortly. So as I said, we targeted the measures to where they would deliver the greatest gains, and more detail on how we did that is provided in the strategy in the appendices. But in brief, the way in which we approached it was, first of all, we looked at what data and evidence there was to inform and define the mapping of each potential measure. And that effectively determined if the measure could be mapped and whether the mapping of it was of sufficient detail to enable that action to be targeted to where it was most needed or where action could be beneficial. And what we found was not all measures could be mapped because that data wasn't there. The mapping approach was too costly or time consuming, or it just couldn't be refined down. But this initial approach of only mapping those measures that could be sufficiently refined to devise our opportunity areas, our areas that could become of importance for biodiversity, meant that some areas of the county appeared, when looking at those maps, to have no potential or importance for nature recovery. And this obviously was not the case, and instead just represented areas where measures largely related to improving management, the better aspects, the better principles of the strategy. And therefore, there was little on which to prioritise one area over another. Or it could just be that the available data just wasn't available, wasn't good enough to sort of, drill down and enable the required refinement that we understood was required for those opportunity mapping. But the feedback we got from stakeholders was this was problematic and unfairly misrepresented the actual value of these areas to nature recovery. So this was all taken on board, and we decided to take the approach that any measure that could be mapped, we would map, even if it was only to the extent of basing the opportunity on existence of the habitat type or the potential for that habitat type. So it meant that we mapped a lot more of the measures, but not all of them were sort of suitably refined, but at least presented a good idea of all the opportunities that existed around the county to recover nature and to deliver on the identified potential measures. The potential measures mapping then was reviewed and refined with our stakeholders and partners, and that included going to all of our planning authorities and also our two national landscape teams, so having dedicated sessions with them on top of the workshops and evening sessions that we had with stakeholders. And that was really important because a lot of our mapping work was effectively desk-based. So this allowed us to ground truth those maps with people who really knew the area. And then that also allowed us to refine further that potential measures mapping by looking at opportunities to address other wider challenges that were known to exist in those areas, and also other benefits such as health and access. And all of this potential mapping is available online, and I will cover that in more detail in the final session. So within the strategy, only grouped measures are presented. So this, for instance, shows you all of the measures that sit under the priority for existing coastal and floodplain grazing marsh. So there's a priority that relates to that, and there are a number of potential measures that sit under that priority, and this basically is the map that's associated with it. So it shows you the opportunity for grazing marsh, but it doesn't really give you the detail that allows you to really understand where and, or more importantly, what is the specific action that's required. And the reason we didn't do that was just really because a map at this scale really doesn't help in terms of identifying action. So where that detail is provided is on the online mapping system, where you're able to load one potential measure at a time, and you can really scrutinise it by going down to a more detailed localised level, and I'll demonstrate that shortly. So here we've got example of just one potential measure mapped across the county. So then we come to the three distinct maps that the strategy requires us to present. So the first is the areas of particular importance for biodiversity, and these essentially are our mapped national conservation sites, our local nature reserves, our local wildlife sites, and irreplaceable habitat. And the sort of basis for this is that this is indicating all of the sites we currently have in the county that are offered some level of protection or implied management through the designation and or the planning system. So this was mapped to the letter in terms of what the regulations required. So there was no autonomy in this mapping for us, and that's effectively what we have. And you will be very familiar with our various protected sites across the county, no doubt. The next map was the areas that could become of particular importance for biodiversity, and essentially these were our opportunity and target areas for nature recovery. So the foundation of this map of these areas were the map potential measures. So this is where we separate out our really extensive mapped measures and only used measures that were sufficiently refined to prepare the map. So anything that was not refined was excluded, and largely this related to measures that were not focused on restoration, creation or connection. And our understanding is this is where most of the targeted actions would fall anyway. So we don't feel that we've excluded anything unnecessarily. So that gave us a new layer. We then refined that layer further by going back to what are the wider environmental challenges that could be addressed? What are the nature-based solutions that these habitats can provide us? And also, what are the wider benefits that also could be delivered if we were to place that action in one area over another? So going back to my earlier example of targeting new habitat creation that can sort of support disturbance by humans, and directing that to areas where there might be insufficient access to green space, or there might be sort of poor health and that sort of thing. So really thinking about how we could make the most of the nature recovery from a nature-based solutions perspective as well. And then that gave us our initial areas that could become of importance for biodiversity, but still, as you would appreciate, it was still quite broad. So then we decided that the way in which we would really focus this down and really get this targeted map that we are required to deliver was to use some connectivity modelling. So this placed priority on areas where there were low species flow, where there were connectivity bottlenecks, and also where it could offer buffering or linking of existing areas of particular importance. So going back to that map of the areas that already are considered of great value to nature and supposedly are providing for that. So providing the opportunity to link those up and give us that connectivity across the county that I mentioned earlier on. And the rationale for this placing so much emphasis on connectivity is that joined up principle of connectivity was the ultimate ambition of the strategy if you considered those four principles of better, bigger, more joined up to be a hierarchy where you, by getting things better and working through, you end up with that joined up landscape. And this map just shows you why we had to target. So obviously, like I said, we had not all the potential measures could be used to inform the map because their coverage was really too wide or undefined. And this shows what happens if you were to map all of the potential measures that we had mapped, what the areas that could become of importance for biodiversity would look like. And this shows us what we already know, that everywhere in the county has the potential to be important for nature. But under the requirements of the local nature recovery strategy and the regulations, it required us to be more focused. So that was why we did what we did in terms of drilling down. And that resulted in the areas that could become of particular importance for biodiversity map, which you see in front of you. And that covers just short of 40% of the county. Finally, the last map that we were required to produce was the local habitat map. And that was the local habitat maps is essentially the areas of particular importance and the areas that could become of importance combined. And these two maps together when all the areas are mapped together, they present the areas of strategic significance, and what that means for nature recovery I'll come to in the third and final session. So again, I will pause there and see if there are any questions.
Yeah, we have a couple on the Slido. It's great to see so much focus on connectivity. Are there any plans for green bridges or similar across more roads?
Yes, so that is one of the potential measures that's within the strategy. So there's two approaches in terms of potential measures to that. One is retrofitting, so trying to green up bridges that are already in place, or trying to provide better crossings, better opportunities to address that fragmentation for roads and other infrastructure like railways, trying to address that retrospectively. And then secondly, there's also a potential measure in there that anything new going in, that it shouldn't go in without connectivity being considered, however that is provided for. So we hope that we will see a lot more of that occurring across the county as we go on. In fact, during the course of the local nature recovery strategy, National Highways actually approached us, and not just us, all of the local nature recovery strategy areas, to ask for proposed areas for retrospective or retrofitting crossings to existing infrastructure. So those proposals have actually gone in, and it's those proposals that were done in consultation with partners that make up the maps for those potential measures. And we were very fortunate actually that Stephen Elderkin, who is the director or head of environmental aspects for Highways England, was actually on our local nature recovery strategy board. So I don't know whether that has any sway, but at the very least we had really good information and really good support from him in understanding whether, what these opportunities were that existed for particularly for retrofitting the existing infrastructure.
We have just one other, but it's regarding the mapping tool. So should we save that one for the next section, Liz?
If that's okay with everyone, yes, I think a good idea to just pause that and see if I answer the question in the next session. So we do have time for a 5-minute break, but people may wish to just press on. So perhaps if you could use Katie, I'll have to ask you to look at this, but if you could use the raise a hand function on Teams to show if you'd like to have a break. And if there are a few people wanting to have a break, we'll go with it. If there's no hands up, then we'll push ahead.
No hands so far, Liz.
Okay, right, let's push on then, shall we? That hopefully will leave us with a bit more time at the end of the session, should there be any more questions. So this third and final part of the presentation is looking at how as we understand it, the local nature recovery strategy will be used to inform nature. So just a reminder that this strategy is something that's very much dictated by DEFRA in terms of how it should be presented and what it should do, and also how it is informing nature recovery is very much down to, again, to DEFRA as well. So what I'm presenting here in terms of how it will inform things, what difference it will make, is very much as we understand it, and is also very much based on DEFRA's place, because it's the Environment Act and other legislation and policy that gives weight to the strategy. So just sort of that scene set, that reminder that this is a strategy that's defined by DEFRA, not by the county council. So we have created a mapping tool to support the consultation, and this is very much an interim and sort of well, I'd say it's a simple mapping tool, but Kent Wildlife Trust, who did all our mapping and created the online mapping tool, would probably balk at me calling it simple. But it's simplified just because there are certain aspects of what the local nature recovery strategy will do and how it will be used and how it will inform that we don't really know yet. And so we didn't want to spend a lot of resources and money effectively from the limited budget, designing a tool that in 6 months' time we find out is not sort of fit for purpose. So we wanted to wait to develop that tool to the summer when we have a strategy, and we also hopefully by then will know how it will inform local planning, how it will inform funding, and how it inform government grants, so we can make sure that there's lots of functionality built into the tool to allow people to really get the most from it. So consequently, we're not inviting feedback on the tool. So the consultation is not being taken on the tool itself. It's simply just a platform that allows you to see all the online maps. But there are some bits of functionality to it that will allow you to have a play at least and have a look at how it works. And we will, when we do start developing the online mapping tool, the final one for the published version, we will be going out to the likely users to get some input as to what you would like to see included in it. So when you first launch the mapping tool, you will see this box pops up, and there's just a few notes to help you understand what the tool is, and you just simply click OK, and that will take you through. There is a lot of data that sits behind the mapping tool. So some of the layers may take a while to load, and that will depend, the time it takes will depend on your own internet speed and your own computer as well. But it could be potentially up to 2 minutes. It shouldn't be, but it could be. If it stretches over that, it's suggested that it's probably worth refreshing the page. And if you do have continuing issues with it, then please let us know. But to date, everything seems to be working pretty well. But because of the potential for things to stall, I'm not doing a live demonstration. I'm just going to use screenshots to make sure that we didn't get stuck on the wheel of doom going round. So once you've clicked the OK button, it then brings up the outline map, which you can see here. And you click on the layers menu, and that pulls up the different layers that you can view on the map. So there are a number of different functions that allow you to custom the map to your preference. So first of all, you can select your preferred baseline map. So you can have either street map, which is what we have here, grayscale, or you could view it from a satellite map. So you can view it from pictures. Street map is the default view that comes up. Then you're also able to select whether you want to view the district boundaries, the labels for the districts, and also whether you want to include or not the rivers network. Again, the default is for all of those to be turned on. Also, from here, by clicking on that little table on the left-hand side, you can find the full details of all the mapped potential measures by clicking on that, and I'll come on to that in a bit more detail. And you also have a function to zoom in and out on the map with those plus and minus buttons there. So let's say you want to know what potential measure reference the number relates to. So you would click that table button, and that will bring up this measures table. And then you effectively just pop in the reference number of the potential measure in there, and it will bring you up with the correct measure detail. So it will show you what the measure is, whether or not it was made up or was used to make up that foundation layer for the areas that could become of importance for biodiversity. And it also provides a brief description of the mapping methodology. So you can see that presented across there. If you do want more detail on the mapping method and the data that was used, that's all within the strategy appendices. That's just a very basic summary, so you get an idea of how the map was created. So the first purpose of the strategy is to direct action for nature. And if you haven't got the message yet, to direct it to where it's most needed and where it will deliver the greatest benefit. So mapping indicates where the measures could be delivered. And in some instances, these are wide-ranging areas. In others, they're more specific, depending on, as I said, the mapping capability. But whether it's a big blanket blotch of mapping, or whether it's very specific, in all cases, the mapped areas are indicative. And in some management measures, sort of look, so some of the measures look to introduce management that will enable the functionality or the biodiversity of that habitat. And where these are mapped, that indicates where introduction of that management may be most needed or would deliver the greatest gains. But it's really important to remember that the introduction of appropriate management anywhere will deliver benefits. So just because it's not mapped in an area, if the management, that potential measure is appropriate for that particular habitat at that particular location, even if it's not mapped on our potential measures mapping, doesn't mean that it won't deliver benefit. It's just not seen to be delivering benefit when considered strategically at a county level. And that's what, you know, in respect to that. So some measures may be relevant to the local level, but also they may not. So again, any measure has been looked at a strategic county level, and that's where it's decided how important, how vital it is to the big picture. But that's not to say that when it's looked at the local level, it doesn't have a value too. So just because it's excluded from the mapping, it does not mean that that action is not applicable at the local level. It's just not been considered to be strategically significant at the county scale. And also the desk-based approach means that mapping is theoretical and not based on actual known site conditions. So site assessments and other permissions and prerequisites are required. You know, just because it's mapped does not mean that you don't need to go through all the normal processes of permissions, of applications, but also just initial assessments to see whether that potential measure is appropriate at that particular level. And really importantly is just to go back to this point that the strategy, and in particular the maps and the identified area for that action, does not dictate those, nor does it instruct their implementation. So they're simply a guide for how those that own the land, manage the land, or operate on the land could undertake their work in a way that could support the recovery of nature, but it does not prevent them from doing anything in that area. Nor does it enforce them to do it. So thinking of the purpose of the nature recovery strategy to direct nature recovery actions to where they're needed, I'm just going to take you through how you might look at that using the maps. So first of all, you might already know, having looked through the strategy, you might already know the particular measure or priority reference that you want. So in which case you would just go to the mapping layer and select that. But it might also be that you'll just come in to look at the map speculatively, and you're saying, right, well, I've got an area of habitat, I've got a particular habitat that I want to use, I want to promote nature on it, but I'm not quite sure what to do with it. So what you would do is you would take your particular habitat that you're talking about here, but you could also just put in keywords instead of, it might be that you want to understand what restoration or what creation actions there are across all the habitats. So you could either put the habitat or particular action in the measure search box on the table. Once you've put that in, it will bring up all the measures that relate to that particular habitat type. So you can see here that there are 3 measures within the strategy that have been mapped that relate to grazing marsh. And so it's there. So you would note those reference numbers down, and then you would go back to the mapping layer. So from the drop-down box, you would select the particular measure you wish to. So I selected GL 2.2, and that will bring up mapping, and the blue areas on the map indicate where opportunities for delivery of this potential measure have been identified to exist. So this is how you would use the strategy or the strategies maps, the potential measures maps, to look at where a particular action for nature has been identified could be delivered to aid the recovery of nature for grasslands in this case. And also you have the zoom in and out button, so you can really drill down into specifically where that mapping goes to and where that mapping is found by clicking on the plus and minus buttons. A second purpose of the strategy is to denote areas of strategic significance. So the first way in which this might be applied is that any potential measure that falls within an area that could become of importance for biodiversity indicate that that is an action in an area of strategic significance for the county. So if you have some land and it falls within that area and the action you're proposing to do or undertake aligns with the potential measure identified for that land in a strategy, that may be classed as strategically significant for any grant, funding or investment schemes that are using this as an indicator. Now, this is very much based on our understanding of it, because DEFRA and other funding bodies haven't yet come out and explicitly explained how areas of strategic significance will be used for government grants and other funding, and how other funding bodies and investment schemes will use it. But the fact that it denotes where what the actions are and where they're both delivered, you would assume that it would be delivery of actions in areas of strategic significance that would be the actions incentivised by any funding body that's paying particular reference to the local nature recovery strategy. The one area of strategic significance we have a bit better understanding of how it will work is where it's being used for biodiversity net gain. So biodiversity net gain is a mandatory requirement that aims to make sure that new development has a measurably positive impact on biodiversity, and that gain is calculated through the use of a standard metric which identifies the value of the land that will be lost as a result of the development and the biodiversity that will be gained through what they propose to be put back. And within that metric, there is a strategic significance multiplier that relates to the local habitat map and the potential measures that fall within it. So hopefully it's clear that, you know, whilst biodiversity net gain as a general approach is good, it will be a lot more meaningful in terms of what's required for nature recovery if the gains are not only situated where they are most needed, but also delivering the action required. So rather than it being a planning tick box exercise, it really is targeting action, the action needed and where that action is needed. So as a result, what the metric does is the high strategic significance is applied when the habitat parcel of the gain is located in an area proposed to help deliver the local nature recovery strategy priorities, and the intervention that is being proposed for that parcel is consistent with the potential measures proposed for that location. And I'll come into a bit more detail of how you would view this on the map shortly. The areas of strategic significance, however, should not be seen as a blocker or a preventative tool. So they do not indicate areas where development should be excluded, and they do not, like I say, dictate action or more relevantly, place any limitations on how the land should be used. And in the absence of the guidance from DEFRA and MHCLG on how the local nature recovery strategy is going to be used in plan making, and we understand it is to be forthcoming, it's not expected at this stage that local plans and policies that are already in place will be revised in reference to the strategy. However, there still will be a requirement for planning authorities to have regard to and take account of the strategy in the application of their local plans. And again, I'll come to that very shortly. But local plans, in time, local plans will be revised and updated with a local nature recovery strategy in place. And the local habitat map and its areas of strategic significance will not just be an important source of spatial information, but also a statutory source of spatial information that will be used to inform land use and ensure that within that land use planning, nature and opportunities for its recovery are fully considered. And like I said, I'll come on to a bit more detail on that shortly. So in terms of viewing the areas of strategic significance on the online mapping tool, you first of all will get up your mapping layers again and you select the areas that could become of importance for biodiversity, which will bring up yellow mapping. And then you also click the areas of particular importance for biodiversity, which is indicated by the green. And these collectively, these green and yellow areas together, are the local habitat map for Kent and Medway, and they denote the areas of strategic significance. So in the future, we envisage that the areas of strategic significance will be shown just by one consistent colour, but for the sake of our online mapping tool, so you can understand where different things fall currently, we have mapped it this way by you create the local habitat layer by selecting the two mapped areas that make up those areas of strategic significance. So the way in which you might use this, so first of all, to understand if a potential measure is within an area of strategic significance, you will know the particular measure you want to look at. So we will return to our GL 2.2 for coastal grazing marsh. And we select that. Then you click the areas that could become of importance for biodiversity and the areas of particular importance for biodiversity, and you will get a smorgasbord of colour across the map, all of which indicates various things. So first of all, any area that's shaded in dark green or orange, as indicated here, are areas where that potential measure falls either into an existing area of particular importance or an area that could become of importance for biodiversity. And therefore, if it is orange or dark green, that potential measure does fall within an area of strategic significance in that particular location. If the bit of land that you're particularly interested in remains blue, as shown here by the arrow, it's not in an area of strategic significance. That's not to say you should not be undertaking the potential measure, because it has been shown that that will be delivering benefits for nature. But if you were looking in terms of, for instance, the biodiversity net gain multiplier and trying to get that multiplier associated with the biodiversity net gain you're delivering, if it's being delivered in the blue area, you won't be eligible for that multiplier. Also on the map, you'll see light green colours and yellow colours. The areas mapped light green and yellow are effectively the areas that could become of importance or areas that are of importance for biodiversity in that region where the potential measure has not been identified for. Just by selecting either the area that could become of particular importance for biodiversity or the layer areas that of particular importance, you can see if that potential measure falls into either of those particular areas. We don't yet know whether there's any significance in understanding whether it falls in one or other, but there is the opportunity for you to view that if that's sort of details that you would like to view. So those are two ways in which the strategy influences, and that's the way in which you might want to look at those maps during a public consultation and also once we get to delivery. But a third way in which the strategy will sort of assist nature recovery is through influencing local planning. So once the strategy is published, which hopefully will be summer this year, the strategy's areas planning authorities will be required, will have a statutory requirement to take account of the local nature recovery strategy when they are preparing either local plans, minerals and waste plans, and neighbourhood plans. And like I said, this is statutory, and it will be there will be guidance provided. We just don't currently have that guidance. But regardless, this is a really important role for the strategy because it does help to ensure that we are seeing nature and opportunities for its recovery considered alongside the future plans for the county and being considered alongside other demands for land as well. So really making sure sort of along that aspect, that approach of trying to make sure that space is made for nature as well as everything else that we need to deliver within the county. Many of our planning authorities in Kent and Medway already have in place revised local plans and policies or are very well advanced in the process of the plan revision. And as I said, there's not any expectation, we haven't been told otherwise, that the strategy will be applied retrospectively. And certainly we don't expect in any way that the local nature recovery strategy will supersede any land use decisions already taken, including allocated sites. So it will not be something that could be used to challenge an existing local plan. And further to that, the strategy is not designed as a tool to prevent development, and the areas that could become of importance for biodiversity do not preclude development. Instead, its role is to inform future local plans, and through its role in biodiversity net gain, where development is occurring, it is hoped that the strategy will help to maximise genuinely positive outcomes for nature. In some locations, we do find that there has been more than one measure identified, and we decided to retain the overlap of measures because that ensures that no opportunity for nature recovery is missed, but also recognises that where you might be looking at a really broad area of the county, that you consider a range of habitats, and to create the mosaic that we know nature recovery needs in terms of habitat types. You know, we don't just want one habitat type, we need that mosaic. And where you might be doing a landscape scale recovery, it's really important to think of the mosaic that is required. We will be undertaking further work between now and the publication to think of ways in which we can assist people to better sort of prioritise which particular measure should be taken over another. But we largely envisage that these will be based on the application of the strategy, the strategy principles. So effectively using them as a hierarchy, that the first measure chosen should be based on making sure that appropriate management is in place, so that anything you are building on from that point is built on high quality habitat that's in good and well resourced management. And from there, you build on what you already have. So ideally, instead of just creating, you extend and buffer through natural regeneration, through restoration, and through that management. But where there's not that opportunity to extend, you would establish new. And finally, we envisage that because the areas that could become of importance for biodiversity, because they were framed and based on the ultimate aim of a connected landscape, that the principle of joined up will actually be achieved by applying either better, bigger or more in those areas that could become of particular importance for biodiversity. So everything we're working towards always brings us back to making sure we've got a more joined up landscape for nature to move across. We also will look at how we can support people to identify which might be the better priority, or so the better measure rather, because it could be one that might deliver against one of the strategy's 140 odd priority species. So just finally, just a quick note of caution in terms of nature protection. So this is a strategy that's focused on providing a framework for nature recovery, directing action to where it's most needed and where it will deliver those gains that we want to see. The strategy, its measures, its priorities, and more importantly, its maps do not offer any formal or otherwise protection, which can only be provided through statutory designations or local adopted planning policy. There is the case that local authorities may choose to use a strategy to help identify land that could be set aside for the purposes of nature recovery. And we certainly would encourage them to consider that as a role for it, but there is no requirement on any planning authority to do that. So there it's really important that no element of the mapping is viewed as some form of level of protection or even prevention in terms of activities that might come through. So that concludes the overview of what the strategy, we envisage how the strategy will deliver. But before I do sort of wrap up, I'd like to just reflect on this quote from the wonderful Sir David Attenborough, to remind us of why such a strategy, and more importantly, why the ownership and delivery of it together is really so important to us really achieving what we need to see. And therefore, it's really important that we hear everyone's views on the strategy so that we can ensure it is something that you not only can endorse, but also can adopt when you are delivering your own action for nature recovery. So that ends the formal part of the session in terms of presentation. So now we can just use whatever remaining time there is to answer any questions you may have. Katie, I'll hand over to you to do the directing.
Yeah, so we've got a couple on the Slido again. First, regarding the mapping tool, please explain why existing biodiversity net gain sites where work has started are not on it.
So if they're not on it, then that's certainly something that you can bring to our attention. That the mapping has been based, as I said, on as a desk-based exercise where we have looked at the opportunities for where that potential measure can be delivered. We have not looked at where there is already action ongoing to dictate where those are. That is something we need to have a look at how we can embed that into the mapping. All of this that we're doing is very much the first time we've done anything like this. And although a number of strategies are progressed, we are one of the sort of front runners in terms of where we're at with the strategy. And so we're limited in learning from others as to how they've embedded things like that. But you're right. I mean, there is an issue in terms of where biodiversity net gain is being delivered. Obviously, those providers would want to see their areas seen as strategically significant. So we can look at that, but I will say that any areas that are proposed, that you might bring forward and say, right, this is an area for biodiversity net gain, we want it to be included within the area of strategic significance. It can only be included for that if it does meet the requirements of strategic significance, that it is in an area where that has been identified to need. So we would need some evidence as to why that particular area is an area of strategic importance to the recovery of nature, but we're very open to receive those suggestions.
And we also have, how do you think the government's plans for reforming the planning system will affect the implementation of the LNRS?
So unsurprisingly, we've been asked this question a couple of times, and the answer is, I'm afraid, we just don't know. The local nature recovery strategy, the one thing that is in its favour is that it's enshrined in law. So it's not something that the current government might look at as the desire of the previous government, and they want to get rid of it and put something in place of their own. It's very unlikely that that would happen, not least of all because the Environment Act had cross-party support as well, and a huge amount of money and time has been invested into producing the local nature recovery strategies. How much weight they really have, I mean, one could sort of take a guess from the fact that we don't yet have the promised guidance on the role of local nature recovery strategies in planning. One of the reasons we don't have that is probably because of the planning reforms, and so they want to make sure that that they are aligned. So it's very difficult for me to answer that, and not just in terms of planning reforms, but also any future potential devolution and the new structures that might occur within the county. We just don't know. These questions in terms of planning reforms are very much one for DEFRA to answer. Again, like I say, this is a strategy that we've been asked to produce, and the actual mechanisms by the way in which it feeds into local planning, we're not privy to yet. We can only make a guess based on or good guess, but an educated guess based on the information we've been provided to date. But any questions like these, which we're not able to answer, but obviously really fundamentally important, we will be taken back to DEFRA to see if we can get answers. So sorry, that's a really useless answer for you, but we are just as intrigued as you are to understand that.
So that's it for the Slido questions. Did anyone have anything they wanted to put their hand up for? If not, I think that's all of them, Liz.
Lovely. Well, thank you, everyone. We're finishing with 3 minutes to spare. So I do really appreciate everyone attending this evening. And please do, if you can, do come along to one of our public events that we're hosting. They're all online. We'll be at various locations across the county for the next 2 months, hoping to speak to and meet people to understand what they want to see in the nature recovery and strategy, and ensure that it reflects what they have previously told us. And please do share details of the consultation with your residents and your partners and anyone else who may be interested. And please do give us your thoughts. We really would love to hear from you as to how you view the strategy. But if there are no further questions, I will conclude this evening, and thank you very much for your time. Thank you. Bye-bye.